It was a bright, sunny afternoon in a small, quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where houses sit close together, and people wave hello when they see each other. Kids ride bikes down the street, dogs bark at squirrels, and everyone pretty much knows everyone, or at least they think they do. The grass was green, the sky was blue, and everything seemed peaceful. But looks can trick you sometimes, and this neighborhood had a big surprise waiting. That's where we meet Jake. Jake was a guy who lived in a little white house with a red door. He wasn't super tall or super short. He wasn't super loud or super quiet. He was just Jake, a regular guy with a big smile and a best friend who wasn't so regular. His best friend was a parrot named Polly. Yep, a parrot. Polly wasn't like a dog or a cat that you see all the time. She was special. She had bright green feathers that shined in the sun, a little yellow spot on her head, and a beak that looked like it could crack a nut in one bite. But the coolest thing about Polly? She could talk. Not just talk like hello or goodbye. Polly could say all kinds of things. She could copy what people said, like a little echo. If Jake said, "Time for lunch," Polly would flap her wings and squawk, "Time for lunch." If Jake laughed, Polly would laugh too, a funny, chirpy laugh that made you giggle. Sometimes, she even sassied back. Like if Jake said, "Polly, be quiet," she'd tilt her head and say, "No way, Jake." Jake thought it was the funniest thing ever. He loved Polly more than anything. She wasn't just a pet, she was his buddy. Jake's house was small but cozy. It had a tiny front yard with a bird bath where Polly liked to splash around. Inside, there was a big cage by the window for Polly, but Jake let her fly around a lot. She'd sit on his shoulder while he watched TV or perch on the kitchen counter while he made sandwiches. Jake worked at a store downtown, selling tools and hammers and stuff like that. He wasn't rich or famous, but he was happy. He had Polly, a comfy couch, and a fridge full of snacks. Life was good. Most people in the neighborhood liked Jake. He was friendly. He'd say hi to the mailman, wave at the kids on their bikes, and even share cookies with Mrs. Thompson, the old lady next door. Mrs. Thompson thought Polly was great. "That bird's got spunk," she'd say, chuckling. The kids liked Polly too. They'd ride by and yell, "Hey, Polly, say something." And Polly would squawk, "Hi, kids." They'd laugh and pedal away. Almost everyone thought Polly was cool except for one person. Her name was Karen. Karen lived right across the street from Jake in a big house with perfect flowers and a shiny mailbox. She wasn't just any neighbor. She was the HOA queen. HOA stands for Homeowners Association. It's a group that makes rules for the neighborhood, like no loud music or no messy yards. Karen was the boss of it. She walked around like she owned the whole street. Her hair was always perfect, her clothes were always neat, and she carried a little notebook where she wrote down anything she didn't like. If your grass was too long, Karen would know. If your dog barked too much, Karen would complain. She had a sharp nose for trouble and an even sharper tongue for yelling about it. To Karen, Jake was a problem. She didn't like him one bit. She called him that noisy guy with the annoying bird. Every time Polly squawked, Karen's face would scrunch up like she'd bitten a sour lemon. She'd stand on her porch, arms crossed, staring at Jake's house. "That bird needs to shut up," she'd mutter. Jake didn't get why she was so mad. Polly wasn't that loud. Sure, she talked a lot, but it was funny, not annoying, at least to Jake. He'd just shrug and say, "She's just being Polly." But Karen didn't see it that way. It started small. One day, Jake was in his yard tossing a ball for Polly to chase. She didn't catch it with her beak, she'd just flap after it and squawk, "Get the ball." It was a game they played. The sun was shining, a breeze was blowing, and Jake was grinning. Then Karen marched over. Her shoes clicked on the sidewalk, and her frown was bigger than ever. "Jake," she snapped. "That bird is too loud. I'm trying to read my book, and all I hear is squawk, squawk, squawk." Jake looked at her, surprised. Sorry, Karen. She's just having fun." Polly tilted her head and said, "Fun, fun, fun." Karen's eyes got narrow. "Keep it quiet," she said, then stomped back to her house. Jake didn't think much of it. Karen was always grumpy. He figured she'd get over it. But she didn't. The next day, he was watering his plants, and Polly was perched on the porch railing, singing a little song she'd made up. Sunny day, she chirped. It was cute. Jake hummed along. Then Karen's voice cut through the air like a knife. Jake. That bird again. I'm warning you. She was standing by her mailbox, glaring. Jake waved. She's just singing, Karen. Polly flapped her wings and added, Hi, Karen. Karen's face turned red. This isn't over, she said, and stormed inside. That's when Jake started to notice something. Karen wasn't just annoyed, she was mad. Like, really mad. Every time Polly made a sound, Karen acted like it was the worst thing in the world. If Polly said hello, Karen would huff. If Polly laughed, Karen would groan. One time, Jake was raking leaves, and Polly was hopping around the yard, saying, Rake, rake, rake. Karen poked her head out her window and yelled, Can't you control that thing? Jake scratched his head. She's a bird, Karen. She talks. But Karen didn't care. To her, Polly was trouble, and Jake was the guy who let it happen. Jake tried to be nice. He didn't want a fight. He'd lived in the neighborhood for 2 years, and he liked it there. He didn't want Karen to hate him. So one day, he baked some cookies, chocolate chip, his favorite, and walked across the street. Polly sat on his shoulder, quiet for once. He knocked on Karen's door. She opened it, looking suspicious. What do you want? She asked. Jake held up the cookies. Hey, Karen, just thought I'd say hi. Sorry if Polly's been loud. Polly tilted her head and said, Sorry. Jake smiled. See? She's nice. But Karen didn't smile back. She took the cookies, said, Keep that bird quiet, and shut the door. Jake sighed. Well, we tried, Polly. Back at home, Jake sat on his couch, munching a cookie he'd saved. Polly hopped onto the coffee table. Karen mad, she said. Jake laughed. Yeah, she's always mad. He didn't know why Karen was so upset about a talking bird. Lots of people had pets. Mr. Lopez down the street had a dog that barked all night. The kids across the road rode bikes that screeched on the pavement. But Karen only cared about Polly. It was weird. What Jake didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Karen had a secret. A big one. She acted like she was perfect, with her neat house and her HOA rules, but there was something she was hiding. And Polly? That little parrot with the big mouth? She was about to let it slip. Not on purpose, of course. Polly didn't know secrets. She just heard things and said them out loud. But what she heard from Karen's house was wilder than Jake could guess. See, Jake seemed simple. Just a guy with a bird, living a quiet life. He went to work, came home, played with Polly, and went to bed. He didn't bother anyone. He didn't cause trouble. But Karen didn't see that. To her, he was that noisy guy. She didn't know Jake was smarter than he looked. He noticed things like how Karen's curtains were always closed, or how she got jumpy when cars slowed down near her house. He didn't think much of it at first. He was too busy laughing at Polly's silly words. But soon, those little clues would add up. The neighborhood was quiet, but not as quiet as it seemed. Behind Karen's perfect flowers and shiny mailbox, something sneaky was going on. And Polly, with her sharp ears and loud voice, was picking up bits and pieces. She didn't understand what she heard, not yet. But she'd repeat it, word for word, at just the right time. And when she did, oh boy, Karen was in for a shock. It all started on that sunny afternoon. Jake was in his yard, tossing a toy for Polly. She flapped after it, squawking, Catch it, catch it. The sun was warm, the air was fresh, and Jake felt good. Across the street, Karen watched from her window, her frown growing. She didn't like Jake. She didn't like Polly. And she really didn't like what was coming next. Because Polly was about to say something that would flip everything upside down. But that's getting ahead of the story. For now, it was just Jake and Polly, having fun in their little world. Karen was just the grumpy neighbor who didn't get it. The neighborhood was calm, at least on the outside. And nobody, not even Jake, knew what Polly was about to spill. It was a secret so big it would make your eyes pop. A secret Karen thought was safe. But with a parrot like Polly around, nothing stays secret for long. So there they were, Jake, the guy who loved his bird, and Karen, the HOA queen who hated her. Two neighbors, one street, and a whole lot of trouble brewing. Jake didn't know it yet, but his ordinary day was about to get crazy. And Polly? She was the key to it all. What was her secret? How did she know it? And what would Karen do when it came out? You'll have to keep reading to find out. Because this story? It's just getting started. Karen had it out for Jake from the very first day he moved in. She didn't like him one bit. She didn't like his little white house with the red door. She didn't like his messy hair or his big smile. And most of all, she didn't like his parrot, Polly. To Karen, Polly was the worst thing in the whole neighborhood. That bird's a nuisance, she'd yell over the fence, her voice so loud it made the squirrels run up the trees. It's too noisy. I'm calling the HOA. You'll be fined. Jake didn't get mad. He didn't yell back. He just smiled and waved, like it was no big deal. Okay, Karen, he'd say, nice and calm. And then Polly would flap her green wings and chirp, hello, Karen, in her happy little voice. That made Karen even madder. Her face would scrunch up, her eyes would get small, and she'd huff like a dragon about to breathe fire. It drove her nuts. Absolutely nuts. Jake thought it was funny. He'd laugh and pat Polly's head. Good girl, he'd whisper. But Karen? She wasn't laughing. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the boss of the HOA, the Homeowners Association. That's a group that makes rules for the neighborhood, like no loud dogs or keep your grass short. Karen loved rules. She loved telling people what to do. She'd walk around with her little notebook, writing down every tiny thing she didn't like. If your trash can was out too long, she'd write it down. If your kid left a toy in the yard, she'd write it down. And if Polly squawked, oh boy, Karen would write a whole page about it. To her, Jake and his bird were breaking all the rules. She wanted them gone or at least quiet. It wasn't just yelling, though. Karen meant business. One sunny morning, Jake was outside watering his flowers. The sun was bright, the birds were singing, and Polly was hopping around the grass, saying, water, water, in her chirpy voice. Jake smiled. He liked days like this, calm and happy. But then he heard it, the click-click of Karen's shoes on the sidewalk. She stormed over, her face red as a tomato, waving her phone like it was a weapon. Jake, she shouted. I've had it. That parrot keeps saying weird things like cops are here. And I won't stand for it. Jake blinked. He wasn't sure what she meant. Cops are here, he said, scratching his head. She's just a bird, Karen. Relax. He laughed a little, thinking it was silly. Polly tilted her head and squawked, relax, relax, mimicking Jake. That was her thing, she loved copying people. Jake thought it was cute. But Karen? She didn't think it was cute at all. Her eyes got big, her hands went to her hips, and she glared at Polly, who was perched on Jake's shoulder. You'll see, she muttered, her voice low and grumpy. I'm putting an end to this. Then she turned and marched back to her house, her shoes clicking all the way. Jake watched her go, still smiling. She's really mad today, huh, Polly, he said. Polly flapped her wings and said, mad, mad. Jake chuckled and went back to watering his flowers. He didn't think much of it. Karen was always mad about something. One time, she got upset because Mrs. Thompson's cat slept on her porch. Another time, she complained because the mailman parked his truck too close to her driveway. Jake figured this was just Karen being Karen. No big deal. But it was a big deal to Karen. She didn't just want Polly to be quiet. She wanted Polly gone. She didn't like how that bird talked all the time. She didn't like how it said strange things. Cops are here. Where did that even come from? Karen didn't know, and she didn't care. She just wanted it to stop. She sat in her big house across the street, staring out her window at Jake's place. Her curtains were closed tight, but she peeked through a tiny crack. She watched Jake toss a toy for Polly in the yard. She heard Polly squawk, catch it. And every sound made her madder. The next day, things got worse. Jake was raking leaves in his yard. It was fall, and the ground was covered in red and yellow leaves. He liked raking, it was peaceful. Polly hopped around nearby, pecking at the leaves and saying, "Rake, rake, rake." Jake grinned. "You're my helper, huh?" he said. Polly chirped, "Helper, helper." It was their little game. But then Karen's voice cut through the air. "Jake," she yelled from her porch. "That bird is driving me crazy. Make it stop." Jake looked up, surprised. "She's just playing, Karen," he said. Polly flapped her wings and added, "Playing, playing." Karen's face turned red again. She pointed a finger at Jake. "I'm serious. I'm going to call the HOA and tell them about this noise. You'll get a fine or worse." Then she stomped back inside, slamming her door so hard the windows shook. Jake sighed. "She's really serious, Polly," he said. Polly tilted her head and said, "Serious, serious." Jake laughed, but he was starting to wonder. Why did Karen hate Polly so much? It wasn't like Polly was screaming all day. She just talked a little. She said funny things. Most people liked it. Mrs. Thompson would clap and say, "That bird's a riot." The kids on their bikes would shout, "Polly, say hi," and she'd chirp back. Even the mailman thought she was cool. So why was Karen so upset? The truth was, Karen didn't just hate the noise. She hated Jake too. She thought he was trouble. To her, he was that noisy guy with the annoying bird. She didn't like how he was so relaxed, how he didn't follow her rules perfectly. His grass wasn't always super short. His trash can stayed out a little late sometimes. And that bird, that loud, talking bird, was the last straw. Karen wanted everything perfect. She wanted the neighborhood to be her kingdom, where she was the queen and everyone listened to her. Jake and Polly? They didn't fit in her perfect world. So Karen started a plan. She sat at her kitchen table, her little notebook open. She wrote down every time Polly made a sound. 10 bird says hello. 11 bird says sunny day. Noon bird says cops are here. She tapped her pen on the table, frowning. That last one bothered her the most. Cops are here. Why would a bird say that? It was weird. It made her nervous. But she shook her head and told herself, it's just a stupid bird. It doesn't mean anything. Still, she didn't like it. She wanted it gone. The next morning, she called the HOA. She dialed the number and waited. "Hello, this is Karen," she said when someone answered. "I've got a problem. There's a noisy bird across the street. It's breaking the rules. We need to do something." The person on the phone said, "Okay, we'll look into it." Karen smiled. She felt powerful. She hung up and looked out her window at Jake's house. "You'll see," she said to herself. "I'll win." Meanwhile, Jake had no idea. He was in his kitchen, making a peanut butter sandwich. Polly sat on the counter, watching. "Want some?" Jake asked, holding up a little piece. Polly squawked, "Yes, yes," and took it with her beak. Jake laughed. "You're the best, Polly." He didn't know Karen was plotting against him. He didn't know she'd called the HOA. He just thought she was grumpy, like always. But then something funny happened. That afternoon, Jake was in his yard again, tossing a ball for Polly. She flapped after it, chirping, "Ball, ball." Karen was watching from her porch, arms crossed. She shouted, "Jake. That bird said cops are here again. What's that about?" Jake turned, confused. "I don't know, Karen. She says all kinds of stuff." Polly flapped her wings and squawked, "Cops are here. Cops are here," loud and clear. Karen froze. Her face went pale for a second, then red again. "That's it," she yelled. "I'm done with this." She stormed over, closer than ever, pointing at Polly. "You shut that bird up, Jake, or I'll make you sorry." Jake stepped back, surprised. "Whoa, Karen, calm down. It's just a bird." But Karen wasn't calming down. She was shaking, her eyes wild. "You'll see," she said again, then turned and ran back to her house. Jake stood there, holding the ball. "That was weird, Polly," he said. Polly tilted her head and said, "Weird, Weird. Jake nodded. Yeah, really weird. He didn't know why Karen was so upset about cops are here. He didn't think it meant anything. Polly said lots of silly things like pizza time, or where's my hat. Jake figured she'd heard it somewhere, maybe from the TV. He didn't watch cop shows much, but maybe Polly picked it up from a neighbor's window or something. He shrugged. Oh well, he said, and tossed the ball again. But here's the thing Karen didn't know, Polly wasn't making stuff up. That little bird had ears and a memory like no other. She didn't just copy Jake or the TV. She heard things from all over. She'd sit by the window, listening to the world outside. The kids on their bikes, the dogs barking, the wind in the trees, and yes, even Karen. Polly didn't understand what she heard. She was just a bird. But she remembered it. And she said it out loud, whether it made sense or not. Karen thought Polly was just annoying. She thought Jake was just lazy. She didn't know the truth. She didn't know that Polly's words weren't random. Cops are here wasn't just a silly phrase. It was a clue, a big, huge clue to something Karen didn't want anyone to find out. She thought she could stop it. She thought she could scare Jake and make Polly be quiet. But she was wrong. Because Polly wasn't just a noisy bird. She was a listener. And what she'd heard. Oh boy, it was about to change everything. The tension was growing. Karen was madder than ever. Jake was confused but still smiling. And Polly? She kept chirping, oblivious to the storm coming her way. Karen's plan was in motion. She'd called the HOA. She'd yelled at Jake. She thought she was in control. But she wasn't. Not even close. Because every time Polly said cops are here, it wasn't just noise. It was a warning Karen didn't understand yet. And soon, that warning would turn into trouble she couldn't escape. Ake tossed the ball again, watching Polly flap after it with her bright green wings. Ball, ball, she chirped, hopping around the yard. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, turning the clouds pink and orange. It was a nice afternoon, and Jake felt good. He didn't think too much about Karen's yelling. She was always loud, always upset about something. He figured she'd calm down eventually. She's just grumpy, he said to Polly. Polly tilted her head and squawked, grumpy, grumpy. Jake laughed. Yep, that's Karen. Across the street, though, Karen wasn't laughing. She was in her big house, pacing back and forth in her living room. Her shoes clicked on the shiny wood floor. Her hands were clenched tight. She kept muttering to herself, that bird. That stupid, noisy bird. She didn't like how Polly kept saying cops are here. It made her stomach feel funny, like when you eat too many cookies and then feel sick. She didn't know why it bothered her so much. It was just a bird, right? A silly parrot that talked too much. But every time she heard those words cops are here, her heart beat a little faster. Karen stopped pacing and looked out her window again. She pulled the curtain back just a tiny bit, peeking at Jake's house. He was still in the yard, smiling like nothing was wrong. Polly was perched on his shoulder now, nibbling at his ear. Karen frowned. He thinks he's so smart, she said to herself. He thinks he can just laugh it off. Well, he's wrong. She let the curtain fall back and grabbed her phone. She'd already called the HOA, but now she had another idea. I'll show him, she said, tapping her finger on the screen. I'll make sure that bird stops. Back outside, Jake didn't know what Karen was planning. He was too busy having fun with Polly. He sat on the grass, letting her hop around him. You're the best bird ever, he said. Polly flapped her wings and chirped, best bird, best bird. Jake grinned. He loved how she copied him. It was like having a little friend who always agreed with you. He leaned back on his hands, looking up at the sky. What a nice day, he said. Polly hopped closer and said, nice day, nice day. Jake nodded. Yeah, too bad Karen doesn't think so. Just then, a car drove by, a slow, white car with a loud engine. Jake didn't pay much attention. Cars came and went all the time. But Polly did something weird. She stopped hopping, tilted her head, and squawked, cops are here. Cops are here. Jake sat up. Huh, he said. What's that about, Polly? He looked at the car, but it was already turning the corner. It didn't look like a cop car, just a regular one. He shrugged. "You're silly," he told Polly. She flapped her wings and said, "Silly, silly." Jake laughed again. He didn't think it meant anything. But across the street, Karen heard it too. She was still by her window, holding her phone, when Polly's voice floated over. "Cops are here. Cops are here." Karen dropped her phone. It hit the floor with a loud clack. Her hands shook a little. "Why does that bird keep saying that?" she whispered. She picked up her phone and checked it still working. She took a deep breath. "It's nothing," she told herself. "It's just a dumb bird. It doesn't know anything." But her voice sounded funny, like she wasn't so sure. Karen decided to do something. She couldn't just sit there, listening to Polly squawk. She grabbed her little notebook and a pen, then marched outside. The air was cool now, and the sun was almost gone. She crossed the street, her shoes clicking fast. Jake saw her coming and stood up. "Oh boy," he said to Polly. "Here she comes again." Polly chirped, "Here she comes." Jake smiled, but he felt a little nervous. Karen looked really mad this time. "Jake," Karen said when she got close. Her voice was sharp, like a teacher scolding a kid. "I told you to shut that bird up. It's still yelling weird things." Jake brushed the grass off his pants. "Hey, Karen," he said, trying to be nice. "She's just talking." "Birds do that." Polly flapped her wings and said, "Talking, talking." Karen's face got redder. "It's not just talking," she snapped. "It's saying cops are here over and over." "What's that about, huh?" Jake shrugged. "I don't know. She says lots of stuff. Maybe she heard it somewhere." Karen stepped closer, pointing her pen at him. "You better figure it out, Jake." "I'm not kidding. I called the HOA already. They're going to send a letter. If that bird doesn't stop, you're in big trouble." Jake blinked. "A letter? For a bird?" Karen nodded. "Yes. Noise is against the rules. You'll get a fine, or maybe they'll make you get rid of her." Jake didn't like that. He liked Polly too much. "Come on, Karen," he said. "She's not hurting anyone." But Karen wasn't listening. She wrote something in her notebook, muttering, 3:45 p.m. bird says cops are here again. Then she looked up. "You've been warned," she said, and turned to leave. But as she walked away, Polly squawked one more time, "Cops are here." Karen tripped a little, then kept going, faster than before. Jake watched her disappear into her house. "Wow," he said. "She's really serious about this." Polly hopped onto his shoulder and said, "Serious, serious." Jake patted her head. "Yeah, but don't worry. I won't let her take you away." He meant it. Polly was his best friend. No grumpy neighbor was going to change that. Inside her house, Karen slammed her notebook on the table. "That's it," she said. "I'm not waiting for the HOA. I need to stop this now." She picked up her phone again and scrolled through her numbers. She found one she hadn't called in a while, a friend who worked at the city office. Maybe they can do something, she thought. She dialed and waited. "Hi, it's Karen," she said when her friend answered. "I've got a problem with a noisy bird. Can you help me?" Her friend said, maybe. "What's it doing?" Karen took a deep breath. "It's saying cops are here all the time, and it's driving me crazy." Her friend paused. "That's weird. I'll see what I can do." Karen smiled. "Thanks. I need this fixed fast." She hung up and sat down, feeling a little better. She thought she was winning. She thought she could scare Jake and make Polly be quiet. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know that Polly wasn't just saying random things. That bird had ears like a superhero. She heard everything, every word, every sound, every secret. And cops are here wasn't just a silly phrase. It was something real, something big, something Karen didn't want anyone to hear. The next day, things got even wilder. Jake woke up early. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky pink. He yawned and let Polly out of her cage. "Morning, girl," he said. Polly flapped onto the windowsill and chirped, "Morning, Morning. Jake made some toast and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood wake up. Kids rode their bikes. The mailman waved. Everything seemed normal. But then he heard a knock on his door. He opened it, and there was Karen again. She had her notebook in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. "Jake," she said, her voice loud and mean. "This is your HOA warning. It came in the mail today. It says you have to keep that bird quiet, or you're in trouble." Jake took the paper and looked at it. It was official, with big words like violation and fine. He frowned. "This is about Polly." Karen nodded. "Yes. And if she doesn't stop, you'll pay money or worse." Jake didn't know what to say. "She's not that loud," he said. Polly peeked out from behind him and squawked, "Not loud, not loud." Karen's eyes got big. "See? She's doing it again. And what's with that cops are here stuff? It's creepy." Jake shrugged. "I don't know, Karen. She just says it." Karen crossed her arms. "Well, make her stop, or I'll call my friend at the city. They can take her away." Then she turned and marched off, leaving Jake holding the paper. He shut the door and looked at Polly. "She's not giving up," he said. Polly hopped onto the table and said, "Giving up, giving up." Jake sighed. "Yeah, I wish she would." He didn't like this. He didn't want a fine. He didn't want to lose Polly. But he didn't know what to do. Karen was mad, really mad, and she wasn't stopping. That afternoon, Jake decided to take Polly for a walk. He put her on his shoulder and strolled down the street. The air was warm, and the trees rustled in the breeze. "Let's get some fresh air," he said. Polly chirped, "Fresh air, fresh air." They passed Mrs. Thompson's house, and she waved from her porch. "Hi, Jake." "Hi, Polly," she called. Polly squawked, "Hi, hi." Mrs. Thompson laughed. "That bird's a hoot." Jake smiled. "Yeah, she is." But then they passed Karen's house. She was in her yard, watering her perfect flowers. She saw Jake and Polly and froze. "Jake," she yelled. "Keep that bird away from me." Jake waved. "We're just walking, Karen." Polly flapped her wings and said, "Walking, walking." Karen dropped her watering can. "Ugh. It never stops," she shouted. Then Polly did it again. She squawked, "Cops are here. Cops are here." Karen's face went white. She stared at Polly, then at Jake. "Why does it keep saying that?" she asked, her voice shaky. Jake shrugged. "I don't know. She's just being Polly." But Karen didn't look mad anymore. She looked scared. She picked up her watering can and ran inside, slamming the door. Jake tilted his head. "That was weird," he said. Polly chirped, "Weird, weird." Jake nodded. "Yeah, really weird." He didn't know why Karen was so upset. He didn't know why cops are here made her act funny. But something was off. Karen wasn't just mad, she was nervous. And Polly? She kept saying it, over and over, like it was important. Jake didn't get it yet, but he was starting to wonder. Where did Polly hear that? Why did it bug Karen so much? He didn't have answers, but he had a feeling something big was coming. The tension was thick now. Karen was pushing harder, with her HOA letter and her phone calls. Jake was trying to stay calm, but he was worried. And Polly? She was the center of it all, chirping away with no idea what she was starting. Karen thought she could win. She thought she could stop the noise. But she didn't know the half of it. Polly's words weren't just noise, they were a hint. A hint to a secret Karen wanted to keep buried. And soon, that secret was going to come out, whether she liked it or not. Days went by after Karen's big fight with Jake in the yard. The sun came up and went down, the birds sang, and the kids rode their bikes like always. But things weren't quiet, not really. Karen got louder. Way louder. She didn't just yell over the fence anymore. She started banging on Jake's door, her fists thumping like she was trying to break it down. "Jake," she'd shout, her voice sharp and mad. "That bird's making rude noises again. I can't take it. Do something." Jake stayed calm. He didn't yell back or get upset. He'd open the door, smile a little, and say, "Hey, Karen. Polly's just being a bird. She talks. That's all. Polly would peek out from behind him, her green feathers shiny, and chirp, "Hello, Karen," in her happy voice. That just made Karen madder. Her face would turn red, her eyes would get small, and she'd huff, "It's not hello I care about. It's the other stuff. Make it stop." Then she'd stomp back to her house, muttering about the HOA and fines. At first, Jake thought it was funny. Karen was always grumpy, and Polly was just being silly. He'd laugh and say, "She's got a lot of energy, huh, Polly?" Polly would flap her wings and squawk, "Energy, energy." Jake liked that about her. She was his little buddy who made every day more fun. But after a while, he started noticing something odd. Something really strange. Every time Karen got close, whether she was banging on the door or yelling from her porch, Polly would do the same thing. She'd flap her wings hard, hop around, and squawk, "Cops are here. Cops are here." Loud and clear, over and over. The first few times, Jake giggled. "That's a funny one, Polly," he'd say. "Cops are here? What cops?" He'd look around the yard or down the street, but there were no cops. Just trees, houses, and maybe a squirrel or two. He figured it was just Polly being her goofy self. She said all kinds of things like "pizza time," or "where's my shoe?" So "cops are here" didn't seem like a big deal. But it kept happening. Every time Karen showed up, Polly would say it. "Cops are here. Cops are here." It was like a little alarm going off whenever Karen was near. Jake started to wonder. Where'd she learn that, he asked himself one day. He was sitting on his couch, eating a peanut butter sandwich, while Polly hopped around on the coffee table. "Cops are here," she squawked, tilting her head. Jake put his sandwich down and looked at her. "Polly," he said, "I didn't teach you that. Did you hear it on TV?" Polly flapped her wings and chirped, "TV, TV." Jake scratched his head. "Maybe," he said, but he wasn't sure. He didn't watch cop shows much. He liked cartoons and funny movies. So where was Polly getting it? He decided to pay more attention. Not just to Polly, but to everything. He started watching Karen too. She wasn't just nosy, she was sneaky. Really sneaky. One morning, Jake was in his kitchen making toast. Polly was perched by the window, looking outside. Jake glanced out and saw Karen across the street. She wasn't on her porch like usual. She was by his fence, peeking through the slats. Her head bobbed up and down, like she was trying to see inside his yard. "What's she doing?" Jake whispered. Polly chirped, "What's she doing?" Jake shushed her. "Quiet, Polly. Let's watch." Karen didn't see them. She pulled out her little notebook, the one she always carried, and scribbled something fast. Then she looked around, all quick and nervous, before hurrying back to her house. Jake frowned. "That's weird," he said. Polly hopped closer and squawked, "Weird, weird." Jake nodded. "Yeah, really weird. Why's she spying on us?" He didn't get it. Karen was mad about Polly, sure, but why was she sneaking around like that? It didn't stop there. The next day, Jake was raking leaves again. The yard was full of them, red, yellow, and crunchy. Polly hopped around, pecking at the piles and saying, "Leaves, leaves." Jake smiled. "You're my helper, huh?" he said. Polly chirped, "Helper, helper." But then he heard a noise, a little rustle by the fence. He looked up and saw Karen again. This time, she was peeking through his front window, her nose almost touching the glass. She had her notebook out, writing fast. When she saw Jake looking, she jumped back and ran off, her shoes clicking on the sidewalk. Jake put the rake down. "Okay, that's super strange," he said. Polly flapped her wings and squawked, "Strange, strange." Jake walked over to the window and looked out. He didn't see Karen anymore, but he saw something else, a little piece of paper on the ground where she'd been standing. He went outside, picked it up, and read it. It said, "Bird noise 11a.m. Jake blinked. "She's keeping track of everything Polly says," he said. Polly landed on his shoulder and chirped, "Everything, everything." Jake shook his head. "This is getting crazy." And then there was Polly herself. She wasn't just saying cops are here anymore. She started saying other stuff Jake hadn't even said. One night, he was watching TV, a funny show about dogs. Polly was perched on the couch, nibbling a cracker. Out of nowhere, she flapped her wings and said, in a low, gruff voice, "Hide it quick." Jake dropped his remote. "What?" he said, turning to her. Polly tilted her head and said it again, "Hide it quick." It wasn't her usual chirpy voice. It was deep and rough, like a man talking fast. Jake stared at her. "Polly, who's teaching you the stuff?" he asked. Polly hopped closer and squawked, "Stuff, stuff." Jake scratched his head. "I didn't say that. Nobody in the house said that." He thought hard. Was it the mailman? No, he just said hi and left. Was it Mrs. Thompson? No, she had a soft voice and talked about flowers. Was it the kids on their bikes? No, they just yelled silly things like "Go, Polly." So where was it coming from? He started listening more. The next morning, he sat by the window with Polly, sipping juice. The street was quiet, just a bird singing and a car driving by. Then Polly flapped her wings and said, "Hide it quick," again, in that same gruff voice. Jake looked at her. "Okay, that's creepy," he said. Polly chirped, "Creepy, creepy." Jake set his juice down. "Where are you hearing this, girl?" He looked outside, but there was nothing, no people, no cars, just the wind. He didn't get it. Later that day, he took Polly outside. They sat on the porch, enjoying the sun. Jake tossed her a little ball, and she flapped after it, saying, "Ball, ball." It was fun until Karen showed up. She marched over, her notebook in hand, her face all scrunched up. "Jake," she yelled. "That bird's at it again. I heard it from my house." Jake stood up. "Hey, Karen. She's just playing." Polly hopped closer and squawked, "Cops are here. Cops are here." Karen's eyes got big. "See? That? Why does it say that?" Jake shrugged. "I don't know. She just does." Karen stepped closer, pointing at Polly. "You better find out, Jake. I'm not playing around. The whole letter wasn't enough. I'm calling my friend at the city tomorrow." Jake blinked. "The city? For a bird?" Karen nodded. "Yes. They can take her away if she's a problem." Then Polly did something new. She flapped her wings and said, "Hide it quick," in that gruff voice. Karen froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared at Polly, then at Jake, then turned and ran back to her house fast. Jake watched her go. "Whoa," he said. "What was that about?" Polly hopped onto his shoulder and chirped, about. Jake patted her. "You're full of surprises, huh?" He was starting to think something was up. Karen wasn't just mad, she was acting scared. And Polly's new words, "Hide it quick," made her run off like she'd seen a ghost. Jake didn't know why, but he was curious now. Really curious. The next few days, he kept his eyes open. He watched Karen more. She didn't just peek anymore, she stayed inside a lot, but he'd see her curtains move, like she was watching him back. One time, he caught her by her mailbox, talking on her phone in a whisper. She looked nervous, glancing around like she didn't want anyone to hear. Jake couldn't hear her, but Polly did. She was on the porch with him, and she squawked, "Hide it quick," again. Karen dropped her phone, picked it up fast, and hurried inside. Jake started putting it together. "Okay, Polly," he said one night, sitting on his couch. "You're hearing stuff I'm not. And it's freaking Karen out." Polly tilted her head and chirped, "Freaking out, freaking out." Jake nodded. "Yeah, exactly." He thought about it. Polly's cage was by the window. She could hear everything outside: kids, cars, dogs, and maybe Karen. Was she hearing something from Karen's house? Something secret? Jake didn't know, but he wanted to find out. The next morning, he moved Polly's cage closer to the window that faced Karen's house. "Let's see what you hear today," he said. Polly flapped her wings and squawked, "Here, here." Jake went about his day making breakfast, sweeping the porch, watering his plants. Every now and then, he'd check on Polly. She was quiet for a while, just nibbling her food. But then, in the afternoon, she started up again. "Cops are here," she squawked, loud and clear. Jake ran over. "What'd you hear, girl?" he asked. Polly flapped her wings and said, "Hide it quick," in that gruff voice. Jake looked out the window. Karen's house was quiet, no lights, no movement. But something felt off. He saw a shadow move behind her curtains, quick and sneaky. "Huh," he said. "What's going on over there?" Polly chirped, going on, going on." Jake didn't have answers, but he had clues now. Polly wasn't just copying random stuff. She was hearing things Karen didn't want anyone to know. Things like "cops are here" and "hide it quick." Jake didn't understand it yet, but he was getting closer. The tension was building. Karen was louder and sneakier every day, banging on doors and making threats. Jake was calm but curious, noticing more and more. And Polly? She was the key. Her little voice was dropping hints, small revelations that didn't make sense yet. But they would soon. Because whatever Karen was hiding, Polly was hearing it. And every squawk brought Jake closer to the truth Karen couldn't stop, no matter how hard she tried. One morning, Jake woke up to a loud sound. It wasn't his alarm clock buzzing or Polly chirping like usual. It was something bigger, way bigger. Sirens. They wailed through the quiet neighborhood, high and low, like a fire truck or an ambulance. Jake rubbed his eyes and stumbled out of bed. He was still sleepy, his hair all messy from the pillow. "What's going on?" he mumbled. He shuffled to the window in his pajamas, blue ones with little stars on them, and pulled the curtain back. Red and blue lights flashed outside, bright and fast, lighting up the street like a Christmas tree. Cops? Real cops? Jake's eyes got wide. He pressed his nose to the glass and peeked out. There were police cars parked all over, 2 in front of his house, 1 down the road, and 3 right in front of Karen's big house across the street. Officers in dark uniforms were marching around, their boots thumping on the pavement. They had radios crackling and flash.bmp lights in their hands. But here's the wild part: they weren't coming to Jake's house. They were going to Karen's. Jake blinked. "Whoa," he said. "What's happening?" Polly was awake too, perched on her cage by the window. She flapped her green wings and squawked, loud and clear, "Cops are here. Cops are here." Her voice bounced around the room, sharp and excited. Jake turned to her. "Polly," he said. "You're right. They really are here." Polly hopped up and down, her yellow head bobbing. "Cops are here. Cops are here," she kept saying, like she was proud of herself. Jake looked back outside. Karen's front door swung open with a big bang. There she was, Karen, the HOA queen, standing on her porch in a fluffy pink robe. Her hair wasn't perfect like usual, it was all wild and sticking up. Her face was red, and she was yelling so loud Jake could hear her through the window. "This is a mistake," she shouted, waving her arms. "You've got the wrong house." "I didn't do anything." The cops didn't listen. 2 of them walked right up to her, calm and serious. One said, "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." Karen stomped her foot. "No way. I'm not going anywhere." Jake's jaw dropped. His mouth hung open so wide you could have tossed a cookie in it. "Polly," he whispered, "what's going on?" Polly flapped her wings and squawked again, "Cops are here." Jake stared at her, then back at Karen. His brain started spinning, like gears clicking into place. All those times Polly said cops are here, it wasn't just silly bird talk. It was real. Something big was happening, and Polly knew it before he did. Outside, the cops were busy. One opened Karen's garage door, and Jake saw boxes, tons of boxes stacked up inside. Another cop carried out a big black bag, heavy and lumpy. Neighbors started coming out of their houses, rubbing their eyes and whispering. Mrs. Thompson, the old lady next door, stood on her porch in a nightgown, holding her cat. "What's all this noise?" she called. The kids down the street stopped their bikes and stared. Even the mailman slowed his truck to watch. Everyone wanted to know what was up. Jake couldn't believe it. He grabbed a shirt, pulled it on fast, and ran to the front door. Polly flapped after him, landing on his shoulder. "Stay here, girl," he said, but Polly chirped, "No way, Jake," and stayed put. Jake shrugged. Okay, fine. Let's see this. He stepped onto his porch, the cool morning air hitting his face. The sirens were quieter now, but the lights still flashed, red and blue, red and blue. Across the street, Karen was still yelling. I'm the HOA president, she shouted. You can't do this to me. I make the rules here. The cops didn't care. One of them, a tall guy with a mustache, held up a piece of paper. We've got a warrant, ma'am, he said. Step aside. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish out of water. She crossed her arms and huffed, but she moved when another cop gently pushed her back. Jake watched, his eyes big. A warrant, he said to Polly. That's like permission to look for bad stuff, right? Polly tilted her head and squawked, bad stuff, bad stuff. Jake nodded. Yeah, something's up. He leaned against his porch railing, trying to figure it out. Karen was mean and bossy, sure, but cops? With sirens and lights? This was wild. Then it hit him like a light bulb popping on in his head. The pieces clicked together, one by one. All those times Karen got mad about Polly. All those times Polly squawked, cops are here, or hide it quick. Jake thought it was just funny bird stuff, but now he saw it. Karen wasn't just an HOA tyrant, yelling about rules and fines. She was hiding something big. And Polly? That little parrot with the big mouth? She'd heard it all. Jake remembered how Polly's cage sat by the window, facing Karen's house. She could hear everything: the kids on their bikes, the dogs barking, and Karen too. Karen's windows were open a lot, especially in the summer. Jake never thought much of it, but Polly did. She listened. She remembered. And she repeated every word she heard, like a tiny tape recorder with wings. Turns out, Karen had a secret side business going on in her garage. Not a nice business like selling cookies or fixing bikes. A sneaky, shady one. The cops were pulling out boxes full of stolen stuff. TVs, phones, jewelry, even a shiny bike that looked like the one Timmy down the street lost last month. Karen had been taking things that didn't belong to her, hiding them in her garage, and selling them to people who didn't ask questions. She made deals with sneaky guys who came late at night, whispering in low voices. Hide it quick, they'd say when a car drove by. Cops are here, they'd hiss if they got scared. And Polly? She heard it all through those open windows. Jake's eyes got wider as he watched. The cops carried out more stuff: a big radio, a stack of watches, even a toaster that looked brand new. Karen stood there, her hands on her hips, yelling, "That's not mine. You're framing me." But the cops just kept working, calm and quiet. One of them opened a box and pulled out a necklace with a big red gem. Mrs. Thompson gasped from her porch. "That's mine," she shouted. "It went missing last year." Karen glared at her. "Shut up, old lady," she snapped, but Mrs. Thompson shook her head. "You're in trouble now, Karen." Jake couldn't help it, he grinned. "Polly," he said, "you knew something was up, didn't you?" Polly flapped her wings and squawked, "Knew it, knew it." Jake laughed. "You're smarter than me, girl." He remembered that day Karen called 911 about Polly, complaining about the noisy parrot. She'd been so mad, waving her phone and yelling, "That bird saying cops are here. I've had it." Jake thought she was just being grumpy. But now he got it: Karen didn't know the cops were already watching her. They'd been onto her for weeks, waiting for the right moment. And Polly? She'd been squawking the truth the whole time. Just then, a cop walked over to Jake's porch. He was big, with short hair and a badge that shined in the sun. "Morning, sir," he said, tipping his hat a little. Jake straightened up. Morning," he said. "What's going on?" The cop smiled, a small, sneaky smile. "Your bird's been a big help," he said, nodding at Polly. "She's louder than our wiretaps." Jake blinked. "Wiretaps," he said. "You mean, like, spy stuff?" The cop nodded. "Yep. We've been listening to her," he pointed at Karen, "for a while. Trying to catch her in the act. But your parrot? She's been yelling it out for everyone to hear." Polly flapped her wings and squawked, "Cops are here." The cop laughed. "See? She's better than our microphones." We heard her all the way down the street. Jake's grin got bigger. No way, he said. Polly, you're a hero. Polly hopped onto his arm and chirped, hero, hero. The cop chuckled. She sure is. We've got enough on Karen now, stolen goods, shady deals, the works. She's been running this little scam for months. Thought she was so smart, hiding it in her garage. But that bird of yours? She blew the whole thing wide open. Jake looked at Karen. She was still arguing, but the cops were putting her hands behind her back now. She yelled, "This is ridiculous. It's that bird's fault. It's lying." The tall cop with the mustache shook his head. "Birds don't lie, ma'am. They just repeat what they hear. And you said plenty." Karen's face went pale. She stopped yelling and stared at Polly, her eyes big and scared. Jake couldn't believe it. So all this time, he said to the cop, Polly was hearing her sneaky stuff. The cop nodded. Yep. She must have picked up every word. Cops are here, hide it quick, all of it. We had our suspicions, but your bird made it loud and clear. Saved us a lot of work. He patted Jake on the shoulder. Good job, kid. You've got a smart parrot there. Jake beamed. Thanks. She's the best. Polly flapped her wings and squawked, best, best. The cop tipped his hat again and walked back to Karen's house, where the other officers were loading boxes into a big truck. Karen was sitting on her steps now, her hands cuffed, her head down. She didn't look like the HOA queen anymore, just a grumpy lady who got caught. Jake turned to Polly. You're amazing, you know that, he said. Polly nibbled his ear and chirped, amazing, amazing. Jake laughed. The sirens faded as one of the cop cars drove off. Neighbors clapped and cheered. Mrs. Thompson waved from her porch. Good work, Polly, she called. The kids on their bikes shouted, yeah, Polly. Even the mailman honked his horn and gave a thumbs up. Jake's heart felt big and warm. He'd been confused before. Why was Karen so mad? Why did Polly say those weird things? Now it all made sense. Karen wasn't just bossy, she was sneaky. She'd been breaking rules, big ones, and Polly heard it all. That day she called 911 to complain. She thought she was in charge, thought she could scare Jake. But the cops were already on her trail, and Polly was the loudest clue they had. The big reveal was out. Karen's secret was done. The neighborhood buzzed with excitement as the cops finished up. Jake stood there, Polly on his shoulder, grinning like he'd won a prize. And in a way, he had. His little bird, his best friend, turned out to be the hero of the day. Karen didn't know it, but she'd picked a fight with the wrong parrot. And now, the truth was loud and clear, just like Polly's voice. Karen's kingdom crumbled fast. Real fast. It wasn't just a little crack, it was like her whole world fell apart in one big crash. The cops were still outside her house, their red and blue lights flashing in the morning sun. They hauled out boxes of evidence, big boxes, little boxes, heavy ones, light ones, all stuffed with the sneaky stuff she'd been hiding. TVs, phones, jewelry, even that shiny bike Timmy lost months ago. They carried it all out of her garage, one trip after another, piling it into their trucks like a moving day gone wrong. Karen stood on her porch, her pink robe flapping in the breeze. She wasn't yelling anymore. She was quieter now, but she still sputtered excuses, her voice shaky and fast. This isn't mine, she said, pointing at the boxes. Someone planted it here. I'm innocent. The cops didn't even look at her. They just kept working, calm and steady, like they'd heard it all before. One officer, a lady with a ponytail, shook her head and said, "Save it for the judge, ma'am." Karen's face went red, then white, then red again. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She just stood there, looking smaller than ever. Across the street, Jake watched it all from his porch. He leaned back against the railing, his arms crossed, a little smile on his face. Polly was perched on his shoulder, her green feathers shiny in the light. She nibbled his ear with her beak, soft and gentle. Good girl, Jake said, petting her head with one finger. You did awesome today. Polly flapped her wings and chirped, awesome, awesome. Jake laughed. Yeah, you really are. The neighbors were waking up now, gathering around like it was a big show. They stood on their lawns, in their pajamas and slippers, whispering to each other. Mrs. Thompson, the old lady next door, leaned on her cane and squinted at Karen's house. "I knew she was up to something," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her cat purred in her arms, flicking its tail. "She was always so bossy, too bossy. I bet she stole my necklace just to be mean." The kids down the street dropped their bikes and ran closer, their eyes big. "Whoa," one of them said. "Karen's a bad guy." Another kid nodded. "Yep. I knew it." Mr. Lopez, who lived 2 houses down, came out with his dog, a little brown pup that barked at everything. "I told you all," he said, waving his hand. "She yelled at my dog for barking, but she's the real troublemaker." The dog yipped, like it agreed. Even the mailman, still parked nearby, leaned out his truck window and shouted, "I always thought she was sneaky. She never tipped me." Everyone nodded and whispered more, their voices buzzing like bees. Jake listened, petting Polly. He didn't say much, he didn't need to. The truth was out, and it felt good. Karen had been the HOA queen, ruling the neighborhood like it was her castle. She made rules, wrote fines, and scared everyone into listening. But now, her castle was gone. The cops had torn it down, box by box, and she couldn't boss anyone anymore. Jake liked that. He liked it a lot. The cops kept working. They carried out the last of the boxes, a big one with a TV sticking out the top. Karen watched, her hands cuffed behind her back now. She didn't fight anymore. She just stood there, her head down, her fluffy robe looking silly in the sunlight. The tall cop with the mustache walked over to her. "Time to go," he said, his voice firm but not mean. Karen looked up, her eyes small and scared. "This is a mistake," she muttered one last time. The cop shrugged. "Tell it to the judge." Then he led her to a police car, opened the door, and helped her in. She sat down hard, staring at the floor. Jake watched the car door shut. "Wow," he said to Polly. "She's really gone." Polly tilted her head and chirped, "Gone, gone." Jake nodded. "Yep. No more yelling at us." He felt light, like a big weight was off his shoulders. Karen had been mad at him for weeks, banging on his door, calling the HOA, threatening to take Polly away. Now she was the one leaving, and it felt right. Really right. The police cars started to leave, one by one. Their sirens stayed off, but the lights still flashed as they rolled down the street. Neighbors waved goodbye, some clapping, some cheering. "Good riddance," Mr. Lopez shouted, and his dog barked again. Mrs. Thompson clapped her hands. "Finally, some peace," she said. The kids ran around, pretending to be cops, yelling, "You're under arrest," to each other. The mailman honked his horn and drove off, a big grin on his face. Jake stayed on his porch, watching it all. The street got quieter as the last cop car pulled away, taking Karen with it. She was gone off to face the consequences of her own mess. Jake didn't know exactly what would happen to her. Maybe she'd go to jail. Maybe she'd just pay a fine. But he knew one thing: she wouldn't be back to boss him around. Not anymore. Her kingdom was done, and the neighborhood was free. A few days later, things started to change. The HOA had a meeting without Karen, of course. Jake didn't go, but Mrs. Thompson did, and she told him all about it later. "We picked a new leader," she said, sitting on her porch with a cup of tea. "It's Mr. Lopez. He's nice, he doesn't care about little things like noisy birds or long grass." Jake smiled. "That's good," he said. Polly, perched on his shoulder, chirped, "Good, good." Mrs. Thompson laughed. "See? Polly agrees." Jake liked Mr. Lopez. He was a short guy with a big laugh, always walking his dog and waving hello. He'd stopped by Jake's house the day after Karen left, carrying a bag of dog treats. "Hey, Jake," he'd said. "Heard your bird's a hero. Don't worry about the HOA anymore, I'm not like Karen. You and Polly are fine with me." Jake grinned. "Thanks, Mr. Lopez." Polly squawked, "Thanks, thanks," and Mr. Lopez chuckled. "Smart bird," he said, then walked off, his dog trotting behind him. The new HOA leader wasn't the only change. Polly became a neighborhood hero, a real star. People started talking about her like she was famous. Mrs. Thompson told everyone how Polly helped the cops catch Karen. "That bird's a genius," she'd say, petting her cat. The kids on their bikes rode by Jake's house every day, shouting, "Hi, Polly. You're the best." Polly would flap her wings and chirp back, "Best, best." Jake loved it. He'd wave at the kids and say, "She sure is." Then the treats started coming. One morning, Jake found a little bag of peanuts on his porch with a note that said, "For Polly, the hero." He didn't know who left it, but he gave the peanuts to Polly, and she gobbled them up, squawking, "Yum, yum." The next day, Mrs. Thompson brought over a handful of crackers. "For your little detective," she said, winking. Polly nibbled them and chirped, "Detective, detective." Jake laughed. "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson." The kids got in on it too. Timmy, the boy who got his bike back, rode up one afternoon with a small box of raisins. "These are for Polly," he said, his cheeks red. "She helped me get my bike. Karen took it, but now it's mine again." Jake took the raisins and smiled. "That's awesome, Timmy. Polly's happy to help." Polly hopped onto the porch railing and squawked, "Happy, happy." Timmy grinned and rode off, waving. Even the mailman joined in. He dropped off Jake's letters one day and handed over a little bag of sunflower seeds. "For the famous bird," he said, tipping his hat. "She's better than a guard dog." Jake laughed. "She sure is." "Thanks." Polly chirped, "Thanks, thanks," and the mailman chuckled as he walked away. Jake shook his head. "Polly, you're a celebrity now," he said. Polly flapped her wings and squawked, "Celebrity, celebrity." Jake couldn't stop smiling. The treats kept coming: peanuts, crackers, raisins, seeds. Jake had to get a jar to keep them all. He'd sit on the porch with Polly, tossing her little snacks while she chirped and hopped around. "You're spoiled now," he'd say, and Polly would squawk, "Spoiled, spoiled." The neighbors loved her. They'd stop by just to say hi, asking, "What's Polly saying today?" Jake would shrug and say, "Oh, you know, fun stuff." Polly would chirp something silly like "Sunny day," or "Where's my hat," and everyone would laugh. Karen was gone for good. No one knew exactly where she went, maybe jail, maybe somewhere far away, but she didn't come back. Her house sat empty, the perfect flowers wilting in the yard, the shiny mailbox getting dusty. The cops had taken all her sneaky stuff, and the neighborhood felt different, lighter, happier. No more rules about short grass or quiet pets. No more banging on doors or HOA fines. It was peaceful, and Jake liked it that way. One afternoon, Jake sat on his couch, Polly on his knee, eating a peanut butter sandwich. He looked at her and said, "You really saved the day, huh?" Polly tilted her head and chirped, "Saved the day, saved the day." Jake nodded. "Yeah, you did. Karen thought she could boss us around, but you showed her." He took a bite of his sandwich and grinned. "You're my hero, Polly." The neighborhood agreed. They didn't just give her treats, they told stories about her. Mrs. Thompson said, "That bird's smarter than half the people here." Mr. Lopez told his dog, "You should bark like Polly, she's got guts." The kids made up a game called Polly and the Cops, where one of them pretended to be Karen, hiding stuff, and the others were cops catching her. "Cops are here," they'd yell, laughing as they ran around. Jake loved it all. He'd sit outside with Polly, watching the kids play, listening to the neighbors chat. The street felt like a big family now, no more grumpy queen to ruin it. Karen had messed up, big time, and she faced the consequences. She lost her house, her power, everything. And Polly? She got a new life as the coolest bird around. One sunny day, Jake took Polly for a walk. He put her on his shoulder and strolled down the street. The air was warm, the sky was blue, and flowers bloomed everywhere. Mrs. Thompson waved from her porch. "Hi, heroes," she called. Polly chirped, "Heroes, heroes." Mr. Lopez walked by with his dog and said, "Hey, Polly. Keeping the street safe?" Polly squawked, "Safe, safe." The kids rode up on their bikes, shouting, "Polly, say something." She flapped her wings and chirped, "Something, something." Everyone laughed. Jake stopped by the empty house where Karen used to live. The windows were dark, the yard was quiet. "She's really gone," he said. Polly nibbled his ear and squawked, "Gone, gone." Jake nodded. "Yep. And we're still here." He turned back toward his little white house with the red door, feeling good. Justice was served. Karen got what she deserved, and Polly got the love she earned. The neighborhood was happy again. No more sneaky secrets, no more mean rules. Just friends, fun, and a chatty parrot who made everything better. Jake pet Polly's head. "You're the best," he said. Polly chirped, "Best, best." And that was that. Karen's mess was over, and Polly's story was just beginning. So here's the thing, friends, sometimes the loudest troublemakers are hiding the biggest secrets. Think about it. Karen was loud, right? She yelled at Jake, banged on his door, and told everyone what to do. She acted like she was the boss, the queen of the neighborhood. She made rules, wrote fines, and pointed her finger at anyone who didn't listen. "Keep that bird quiet," she'd shout. "Cut your grass," she'd snap. She was noisy, super noisy. But all that noise? It was a trick. A big, sneaky trick. She was hiding something huge, stolen stuff in her garage, shady deals with sneaky people. The louder she got, the more she had to hide. And then there's Jake and Polly. They weren't loud like Karen. Jake was quiet, well, mostly. He smiled, waved, and went about his day. He didn't boss anyone around. He didn't make rules or yell over the fence. He just lived in his little white house with the red door, playing with his parrot. Polly was chatty, sure, she squawked, "Cops are here," and hide it quick. But she wasn't mean or bossy. She was just being a bird, a funny little bird with green feathers and a big voice. Nobody thought much of them. Karen called Jake that noisy guy with the annoying bird. She didn't think he was special. She didn't think Polly was smart. But guess what? They were the ones who saved the day. That's the cool part, sometimes the ones you least expect turn out to be the heroes. Jake didn't look like a hero. He wasn't tall like a superhero or strong like a wrestler. He didn't have a cape or a fancy car. He was just a guy who liked peanut butter sandwiches and his parrot. And Polly? She was just a bird, small, feathery, hopping around the yard. Who'd think a bird could stop a bad guy? Not Karen. Not the neighbors. Not even Jake, at first. But Polly did it. She listened, she squawked, and she told the truth when nobody else could. She was the smallest, silliest hero ever, and she made everything right. So next time you judge someone, think twice. You never know who's really watching or listening. Maybe that quiet kid in class, the one who doesn't talk much, knows something big. Maybe that little dog next door, barking at the mailman, is trying to tell you something. Maybe even your goldfish, swimming in its bowl, sees more than you think. People and pets can surprise you. Karen judged Jake and Polly. She thought they were trouble, just a noisy guy and his annoying bird. She didn't see what they could do. She didn't think they mattered. But they did. They mattered a lot. Let's think about that some more. Imagine you're walking down your street. You see a lady with a big hat, yelling at everyone to pick up their trash. She's loud, waving her arms, acting like she owns the place. You might think, wow, she's important. But maybe she's hiding something like a pile of candy she stole from the store. And then there's the quiet boy sitting on his porch, reading a book. He doesn't say much, doesn't bother anyone. You might think, he's boring. But maybe he's watching, noticing things like how that lady sneaks candy into her house. Who's the real hero there? The loud lady or the quiet boy? You don't know until the truth comes out. Or think about your pets. Got a dog? Maybe he barks at the wind or chases his tail. You might laugh and say, silly dog. But what if he's barking because he hears something funny like a sneaky squirrel stealing nuts? Got a cat? Maybe she sleeps all day on the couch. You might think, lazy cat. But what if she's watching out the window, spotting a bird that's up to no good? Pets see stuff we don't. They hear stuff we miss. They're little detectives, just like Polly. And sometimes, they save the day when we least expect it. Let's go back to Jake and Polly for a minute. Jake didn't plan to be a hero. He just wanted to live his life, eat snacks, watch TV, play with his bird. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want fights. When Karen yelled at him, he just smiled and said, "Okay, Karen." He didn't know she was a bad guy. He didn't know she was stealing stuff and hiding it. He thought she was just grumpy. But Polly? She knew. She didn't know she knew she's a bird, not a brainiac, but she heard it all. Every sneaky word from Karen's garage floated through her window, and Polly caught it like a net catches fish. "Cops are here," she'd squawk. "Hide it quick," she'd chirp. She didn't understand, but she didn't have to. She just said it, loud and clear, until the truth came out. And that's what's so awesome. You don't have to be big or loud to make a difference. You don't have to be the boss or the coolest kid on the block. You can be quiet, small, even a little silly like a guy with a parrot and still change everything. Karen thought she was in charge. She thought her loud voice and her HOA rules made her powerful. But power isn't about being loud. It's about doing what's right, even if you're small. Jake and Polly proved that. They didn't fight Karen with yells or fists. They didn't need to. Polly's little voice was enough stronger than all of Karen's noise. So what can we learn from this? Be nice. Watch out. Listen close. Don't judge people or birds too fast. That grumpy neighbor who's always mad? Maybe they're hiding something. That quiet friend who doesn't talk much? Maybe they're the bravest one around. And your pet the one who chews your socks or knocks over your juice? Maybe they're a hero waiting for their big moment. You never know who's got a secret, who's got a story, who's got the power to fix things. Life's full of surprises, and the best ones come from the places you don't expect. Let's imagine some more. Picture a school playground. There's a loud kid, always shouting, always pushing to the front of the line. Everyone notices him. He's big, he's bold, he's in charge. But then there's a quiet girl by the swings, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Nobody pays attention to her. She's small, she's shy, she's just there. One day, the loud kid takes someone's lunch and hides it in his backpack. He laughs, thinking he's so smart. But the quiet girl sees it. She doesn't yell. She doesn't run to the teacher. She just whispers to her friend, who tells the teacher, who checks the backpack. Boom, the lunch is found, the loud kid's in trouble, and the quiet girl's the hero. She didn't need to be loud. She just needed to watch. Or think about a forest. There's a big bear, roaring and stomping, scaring all the animals. He's the king, right? Everyone runs from him. But then there's a tiny mouse, squeaking softly, hiding in the grass. Nobody cares about the mouse. He's little, he's weak, he's nothing. One day, the bear gets stuck in a trap, roaring for help. The big animals run away, too scared to help. But the mouse? He sneaks over, nibbles the rope, and sets the bear free. The bear's shocked. "You," he says. "You saved me." The mouse just squeaks and scurries off. Small, quiet, but brave. A hero when it counted. That's what Jake and Polly are like. Jake's not a bear. He's not big or scary. He's more like the mouse, just doing his thing. And Polly? She's even smaller, a little bird with a big voice. They didn't roar. They didn't fight. They just lived their lives, and that was enough. Karen was the bear, loud, bossy, stomping around. She thought she'd win. She thought her noise would scare everyone into line. But the mouse and the bird beat her, not with claws or teeth, but with truth. Simple, quiet truth. So here's a challenge for you. Look around today. Who's loud? Who's quiet? Who's hiding something? Who's watching? Maybe it's your teacher, yelling about homework. Maybe it's your little brother, giggling in the corner. Maybe it's your hamster, spinning his wheel like he's got a secret plan. Pay attention. Think twice before you decide who's important. The loudest voice isn't always the strongest. The smallest one might be. And speaking of you, what did you think of Polly's big moment? Wasn't it wild? She squawked, "Cops are here," and boom, Karen's whole sneaky plan fell apart. The cops came, the boxes came out, and Polly was the star. I bet you cheered when that happened, right? I did. She's the coolest bird ever. Tell me what you thought in the comments below. I wanna hear. Did you laugh? Did you gasp? Did you say, "Go, Polly"? Let me know. Oh, And here's a fun question: what's the wildest thing your pet's ever done? Got a dog who dug up the yard? A cat who climbed the curtains? A fish who jumped out of the bowl? Pets are crazy sometimes, and I bet you've got a story. Share it with me in the comments. I'll read every one, I promise. Maybe your pet's a hero too, just like Polly. Maybe they've got a big moment waiting to happen. Tell me all about it. This story's over, but we're not done yet. See you in the next one, okay? I've got more tales, fun ones, wild ones, ones that'll make you laugh and think. Stick around, because you never know what's coming next. Maybe it'll be about a sneaky cat or a brave turtle or a kid just like you. Whatever it is, it'll be awesome. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't, and let's keep the fun going. Bye for now, friends. Keep watching, keep listening, and keep being your amazing selves.